Hello, hello, and welcome to Death Cafe with me, your Latinx death doula and bruja pastel supernova. This is where we hold space for everything to do with death, dying, and loss with an open heart. I'll be sharing personal journeys, and also I'll be speaking with insightful minds about everything to do with the inevitable. In this episode, episode 17, you will be hearing from Jason. As he remembers his father, Rick, you'll hear about how losing someone close to you can really open up the awareness of one's own mortality, how estranged relationships can make the grief process even more complicated, and how a loving father-son relationship continues its legacy through delicious meals. Hello.
Hi,
Can you please introduce yourself to everyone?
certainly. I'm Jason Harley. I'm a software engineer and a person who, like anyone sort of approaching their midlife, has had an interesting experience with death and loss and grieving. I'm really happy to be here today to have a conversation about that.
I'm excited for you to share. I always love hearing stories and this is one I don't know. So let's start with who we're going to remember today.
Sure. We're going to be talking about my dad, Rick, who I miss a lot still 9 years later, and who sort of went from being this incredibly healthy, vibrant man who just retired to being aggressively sick and then passing within about a 6 month time span, which was a lot, both at the time and now. I think it's pretty normal to think we always have more time with people like that, and because of that, it was my most profound experience with grief and loss. And we can talk about it a little bit. In a lot of ways, the way that the experience transpired, it almost caused grief to be front loaded. There was a lot of uncertainty and confusion and fear and frustration. But yeah, how's that for me?
You answered it. Yeah. Rick, so what was he diagnosed with?
Ultimately cancer. But the thing is, it took them a really long time to actually confirm that. So in November 2015, I found all this out in March of 2016, but in November of 2015, apparently he sort of had lost of appetite and was a little low energy. And that was a little bit weird, but he just assumed it was sort of either a phase or he was having a hard time adjusting. He had recently retired and it was the first winter, and like maybe it was just a little bluesy or what have you. And I guess he really rallied around Christmas that year. He always loved Christmas, people coming together and shared meals and stuff like that. And was doing like a fair bit better by all accounts. But in January, it sort of started getting worse and worse. And into February, he couldn't really keep food down anymore. And his partner finally convinced him that he needed to go to the doctor, which was a lot. My dad did not like the Western medical system for a variety of different reasons, which is not even to say he was like super hippie woo woo into Eastern medicine or anything. He just was like, my body looks after itself was sort of the vibe. Like, so by the time he saw a doctor, they basically sent him immediately to the hospital. And then it took them a very long time to actually confirm that it was cancer, like 4 months almost.
Why?
They could not get a positive biopsy. There was a lot of exploratory surgeries and they kept ruling things out, and they did blood work and he went to specialists and he was transferred to other hospitals and then back. And well, on one hand, it was encouraging that things were being ruled out. On the other, he was getting much, much worse.
Right.
uh, and sort of watching all this happen. Um, a lot of it, I was a 2.5 hour plane ride away. I was just sort of hearing these updates. It was very interesting, especially in hindsight, to sort of watch that unravel. And finally, after what I think must have been easily the fifth or sixth exploratory surgery, they finally got a positive biopsy, and could confirm that this was like an advanced stage, fairly widespread, which obviously there's some questions to be asked there about why it took so long, but it was quite so widespread, but fairly advanced, like mesh of tumors throughout his lower abdomen. And Samson. And ultimately, by the time they sort of sorted it out, treatment options were incredibly limited. It was sort of a frustrating experience with the medical system, which is not to say people weren't trying. Just when you keep ruling things out and things keep getting worse, it's this very sort of frustrating space for everybody to be.
Yeah.
And he was ultimately deemed not a candidate for chemotherapy. He wasn't healthy enough to actually get into that treatment. And there was some mind that if he could get strong enough again, that maybe that could be what happened. So he went on sort of pretty aggressive intravenous nutrients to see if his body would pick up. And ultimately he didn't. And when he decided, and the one sort of still 9 years later, I still actually really appreciate this part. He ultimately made the decision himself to come off the intravenous nutrients. They told him he'd probably have 2 to 3 weeks to live after making that decision. In reality, it was about 48 hours.
Oh, wow.
So it was very, very aggressive. I remember receiving the note from his then wife. They got married when he was in the hospital, which was a very romantic gesture. But I remember receiving the note that like he had sort of made this choice. And I was walking my dog, actually. I think it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And I was getting ready to go to work, which is the best time to receive these notes.
Totally.
And, I got told that this was a thing and that I should probably try and get there as soon as I could. And I said I would be there the next day. And I was. But by the time that had happened, he had pretty much lost lucidity. And we were in sort of the stages where you sort of sit and support both each other and him. It was the day after that he passed around noon. So, and I have not watched all episodes of this, but I learned quite a lot. I don't know if I say that because I don't know if you talked about this, but there's that phenomenon that there is a high statistical correlation to when you're sort of sitting vigil with someone, regardless of their state, and that apparently there a large percentage of the time when someone specific or a group of people leave the room is ultimately when this decision is made, that they sort of, and it really seems like a decision, they just kind of step away.
Yeah.
So my sister did, and then he sort of just stopped breathing, and that was that. And blessedly, the palliative team at that hospital was really quite good and had been speaking with us throughout. And he was not hooked up to any scary equipment or anything, so there was no like dramatic flatline noises or any of those things. But it was an experience, to say the least. So that was the second week of June or something, to give you an idea of timeline. So we all sort of very quickly moved through. That's what I mean by like grief was kind of front loaded. My dad did not. My dad, I think, definitely felt like he was inconveniencing people a bit by this health situation. And up until things got, like, I think really, really clear that there was not really much chance that we were moving towards better at any point. Um, he was still, we texted a lot. My dad hated speaking on the phone. So we would text and that was fine, but there was always sort of this encouragement that, like, he understood that life was happening and life needed to happen. So, as in preparation for this chat, I was trying to remember various things. And I was actually in Vancouver for work when, sorry, cat's moving the screen. I was in Vancouver for work when he got the full, like, stage 4 diagnosis, when they finally had that positive biopsy. And that's for those who don't know Canadian geography, my dad was on the Atlantic coast and I was on the West coast. That's a 5-hour time swing, which is a really awkward way to sort of have conversations sometimes. So I think it might have even been the end of the day on the West coast. I don't even know. It wasn't sleeping much. It's hard to sleep in hospitals when you're in these sorts of positions, both mentally and physically, I think. But and I remember sort of like looking at myself in the mirror and saying to myself over and over that, like, my father has cancer and he's probably going to die. Which sounds very dramatic and cinematic, but it was at the time, it was this way to sort of catch myself up to the speed that things were happening at and were probably going to accelerate into, which I think ultimately turned out to be true. But it was I don't know why I did that. I don't know what prompted me to do it. To my knowledge, it's not something I read somewhere as a thing that helps. I'm not sure if it did. I think it did. But this idea of, like, really saying the scary part out loud, so that the rest of what needed to happen could happen, ended up being powerful. But yeah, that was a very surreal moment throughout the whole thing.
I bet.
Yeah. I'd been to see him once at that point in hospital. Once he was admitted to hospital, he never left really for more than a couple of hours. Went on some drives with his partner. But yeah, it was just, so it was a very wild thing to see. He had just retired the year before from a lifetime of working in provincial government and had big plans to play golf. And sorry, it was 2 years before he retired. Play golf and kayak and hike. Again, he was this incredibly active, healthy person. He was 61 when he passed away. But in a span of like 6 or 8 months, to go from, like, Saturday morning, he would rent the stationary bike at the university gym for like 2.5 hours, and he would just sit on the stationary bike and, like, read the paper, pedal away, and and do groceries. And so to go from like that, with this idea that I think, especially in this, like, very hustle grind culture, which is something my dad missed that generationally, but, like, the way that we think about work and how reward and time and rest is coming. He and I never really talked about what that must have felt like to have that kind of taken from you. But watching him work through sort of that process himself was also a thing to experience. Like, the way that I think all relationships have phases, and relationships with parents, I think, it'd be particularly interesting. And there's a huge spectrum there that we all sort of experience and don't, and wish we experienced. But sitting with and watching someone sort of prepare to die in this way was something.
What was it like for you?
I think it changed the way that I think about time left a fair bit. I'm in my early 40s now, but I remember through, and this was about 10 years ago, so I was in my early 30s. I remember thinking that like my life could actually be half over. Because again, I never actually asked him directly because it didn't seem reasonable, but like I'm sure he thought he was going to live to be in his 80s. Like he had so much time left, I think. So that was one of the biggest changes for me, the way that I sort of thought about that, and continue to I continue with sort of morbid respect, if you will, wonder how much time I have left in my life. And I don't mean that in like a very morose way, but it was a reminder that we don't really know. And like he did all the things. I grew up in a vitamin taking house, and like we talked about like the fears of nitrates and preservatives, and we like ate good food and all of those things. And and ultimately my father's body ate itself, right? which is a crass way to put it, but like and there was not a whole lot that could be done. Mm-hmm. And throughout all this, people always ask questions, partially because I think they are trying to rationalize the information that like, here's a healthy man who like basically went from like it was like a 6 month the end sort of situation.
Yeah.
So when people hear these stories, they want to help and support, but it is a very human thing to need to rationalize and understand and separate yourself from these things. Sometimes death makes us all in various ways quite uncomfortable. So people, some for sure were saying, oh, it could have been tested early. And in my mind, I'm like, it took 6 exploratory surgeries. I think if it would have been caught early, they would have found it probably by that third one. The community really showed up in a way that was surprising. I was unaware. My dad worked for the provincial government in Nova Scotia for a very long time. His entire life, we used to joke that he did every job in the Nova Scotia park system, from like digging pit latrines in provincial parks to ultimately acting as the director of the department for the province before he retired. And I always knew that he had been and met a lot of people in various ways, but it was overflow at his funeral. There was a whole church in the chapel at the university that I went to, and that overflowed into the basement area where they were actually like streaming the footage from upstairs. So there was, I think someone told me that there was an estimate of like close to 400 people who showed up for this funeral.
Wow.
Yeah. And he had requested that I read a poem, which I read about as well as I just got that sentence out. So, sort of gasp reading a poem in front of 400 people was exactly what it should have been. I can send you the poem if you want to put it in the show notes.
Love it.
But the story behind that in particular was when it was becoming sort of obvious that he wanted some input into what his remembrance was going to look like. The conversation should probably start happening. And the question of readings and such came up. And I am told that he, in his limited mobility, moved incredibly quickly and grabbed his wallet and pulled this poem out of it.
Oh. And
said that, I was to read this. I was not there. But after the fact, I was told this was the request. And I didn't have to do it, obviously. But no, I did. Pressure. No pressure. Yeah. Last month, when your dad was talking about things that you really wanted to have, this was the bit that he said in his mind. Yeah, so obviously I did it. Seemed like a simple thing. I did not do it well. but I did it with the fullness of my capability on that day. And it was, yeah, it was a beautiful day. His partner slash, like I mentioned, they got married when he was in hospital. So his new brother-in-law, who I only met 2 times, he gave a wonderful eulogy, and said to me after the fact that he had practiced a lot and already sort of got through the raspy, heavy-weighted words, and as a result, it was great. People laughed, people cried. It was truly really beautiful, and there were some lovely stories, some that I knew very well, and some that I had never heard, which I get that is another interesting part, at the risk of another side tangent. When a parent passes, I think you end up learning bits and layers and dimensions of their life that you just never could know. Partially because in the moment, maybe it was a mundane thing, but that story had such an impact on someone that they wanted to share it. Or just through the complexity of parent-child relationships, like you know your parent in a very different way from their peers, whether they are professional or whatever, and that's sort of just the beauty of the complexity of the human experience, in a sense, I guess. Like, there's that cliche line that you can never truly know someone, all of someone. Whether that's true or not, I is not for us to talk about today, maybe, but it was really lovely to sort of hear some of these stories and see the people who had shared them in the audience sort of nodding and laughing along. So that was a really beautiful thing. But, the whole experience really sort of changed the way that I think about time left and connection with people, for the better, I think. I work in technology, and it's really easy to sort of get caught up in the wheel of, just doing the thing and building the whatever. And while I love that, remembering to like slow down a little bit is always.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have a sister. She's 2 years younger. She works in healthcare. And she lived 10 minutes away from the hospital where my dad was staying. I was 2.5 hours away by plane, but she was close by. So we are very different humans, which is not to say we don't love each other or don't get along, but we don't connect about it a lot sometimes. We did, I think, do a decent job of supporting each other through this. And when I showed up on that, the day after that dad had made the choice to come off the intravenous nutrients, much to my surprise, my sister met me in the hallway and like grabbed me and said that she was so glad I was there, which is not something I think she had ever said to me in the 31 years that we knew each other. But that was a lovely thing. And she struggled very differently with this loss. The risk of speaking out of school. They were estranged for a little bit after he and my mom separated. And I think that, I'm speculating, we never really have talked about this, but this kind of goes back to time left as well, I guess. I like how much time do we really have left. So when you're taking a break from a relationship with someone, for whatever reason, I think it is always done with this idea that, you can take this time away because there will be all this other time on the other side. I would be shocked, and again, we never really talked about this, if part of what made a lot of his passing harder for her is that she knows that there was I think it was easily 2 or 3 years. They were doing better about a year before he passed away, but there was about 2 or 3 years prior to that she was not comfortable spending time with him. And I think that really hit extra hard with the loss. What what could have happened in that time. Not that someone like she could have like helped make him better or anything like that, but what, of that lost time, in a sense, um, what could they have shared or experienced together?
These things always come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had lived relatively far away for a number of years. By that point, 14 years. So, and we like, my dad and I saw each other maybe once a year, and communicated via text. Like I said, he was happy to do that. Work gave him a BlackBerry, and then he figured out how to text at one point. So that was great. But yeah, and you have talked to far more people about these sorts of things than me, but I'm curious if that, like, we have lots of time left thing is amplified between parent-child relationships or not. I mean, I'm sure with peers or lovers or whatever, there is some element of that. But even as our parents get older, I think it's very easy to just think that they're sort of these indestructible creatures who are going to be there when we need them, when we want them to be, and even appreciate when we don't want them to be.
Yeah. I think it just depends on the bond, on the specific relationship. In terms of my experience with what I've seen between people, relationships that are more difficult in life make it more difficult to grieve through.
Yeah.
It's less about time, like how much time people had and the quality of it, and also whether or not they talked about death beforehand. Because whether you're spiritual, atheist, esoteric, or nothing at all, these questions of post-death, they all come up. Questions, feelings, emotions. You wonder about the person who's going, and when relationships are staticky, a lot of the time you don't have these answers. So there are a lot of big boulders to ram your head against, emotionally.
Yep.
But when bonds are more solid, what I've seen is the grief is still there, but it's you can fall into the grief, the love of the grief, not love for the grief, but the love grief combo.
Yep.
More than getting distracted by the what ifs or, all of the questions that weren't spoken about or the statements that weren't shared.
Yeah, I remember visiting in the hospital and wondering, like, what was a question that, first of all, I think I remember sitting there not knowing what to say a lot. And I was very frustrated by that. His last bit of time was incredibly uncomfortable. Like, hospitals are not great places to get rest, generally speaking. I remember he told me that nights were very long, especially once the diagnosis had come in. It's like sitting in this hospital and not really being able to get comfortable. His bed was uncomfortable. His body was uncomfortable. His mind was uncomfortable. So he spent a lot of time just sort of sitting there. He had his own room. He was a fairly private person, so that like worked out. He had good coverage from his time working for the government. But yeah, I think he just looked out this window in this room a lot. And I'd been to visit a couple times and would do some work. And when he wasn't trying to sleep or when they weren't, doing tests or helping him with hygiene stuff or whatever, I would come over and spend time with him. And sometimes we would just sit, and that was nice too. I think I think he also didn't know what to say sometimes, which is fair. I can only imagine the amount of thoughts and feelings and trying to like work through those in a way that would feel like he was making any kind of sense. I imagine that must have been difficult. But he also just liked being a bit distracted. And some of the most engaging conversations we had were just about anything that wasn't what was happening at that moment.
Yeah.
I talked about a friend of mine who had just found out that she was having a baby. Actually, a friend of mine was just about to have a baby while he was in hospital. So we talked about that, and names and those sorts of things. So that was all, which is like in the full circular nature of these things, like happiness and joy and new life and all of that were still the things that he wanted to hear the most about, which I think was, again, a distraction, but also just a reminder that those are beautiful things that we all hold on to in our own ways. So.
Yeah. It's a bit of a stark contrast and can be a harsh reality for somebody who is doing a life review. I've been in rooms where, when terrible things are happening, you don't want to talk about the terrible thing. Like, you still need to find some sparks.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you may as well give up right away. That's the thing that holds people. That's why family members in the room, there's still some sparks and it keeps you alive. And sometimes it's not so much that you need people to go away, but the stillness has to be present for people to consciously let go.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit.
Sure.
I would love to know about what your relationship was like with your dad before diagnosis.
Sure. Definitely various phases. My dad was, when I was young, my dad was in many ways my hero. I think that is not uncommon for young boys. I had a very lovely childhood, very lucky person in that way. We had like a nice family life, me and my sister and my mom and my dad. Yeah, I remember not liking when it was my dad who was going to look after me when I was homesick from school because he wouldn't let me watch TV all day. My mom would. So when I was in like second and third grade and I was sick, I was always annoyed when it was my dad who would stay home because he made me lie in bed and read books instead of watching TV. As a teenager, my dad and I were very. I look a very lot like my dad. I have a rib that sticks out on the left side and it sticks out in the exact same way that my dad's did. Genetics are crazy. But we, at least at that stage of his life, which would have been like his mid-40s, when I was a teenager, we sort of processed frustration very differently. I sort of would draw and think through things, and he was someone who at that point would like increase the volume of his voice, and his frustration would sort of be very external. So we definitely had some tense times sort of working through that. Those are to say the obvious out loud, those two things fuel each other in the worst possible way from the conflict standpoint. So we like frustrated each other and had a very hard time sort of communicating those things. Oh, sorry. My dog has something to say about people walking by. Mm-hmm. But I think especially, so I went to university very close to where I grew up, and I stayed at home for the first 2 years of that and drove back and forth. And then I got an apartment in the town the university was in with someone who I'd met in my program, and we lived there. And sort of from that point onward, I think our relationship shifted in a very positive way. I'm the eldest of my two siblings, and I think it was sort of like proof positive that that like they didn't fuck up too bad, my parents. Like I was actually like figuring out how to live on my own. I was doing well in school, and like my apartment was actually clean, and I knew how to cook, and I did my own, like I did those things. I was a capable human.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I understand some dudes' genitals get in the way from like doing dishes and laundry. I've never actually found that to be true.
A whole other podcast.
Size does okay. The but yeah, shortly after that, I moved away from there, and I have been sort of in this city ever since. And yeah, I think we did talk about this a bit when he was in the hospital. He's like, you've lived some lives. When I was in my early 20s, I separated from a partner who we had bought a house together even. So I sort of have to unravel that. I think I was 24. And that is effectively like divorce. We were not legally married, but we were common law, and we had shared assets and all those things. We had to unwind all of that stuff. And my parents had actually separated like a few months before that happened. It was 2008 was a banger of a year for me. But we I used to say, even before he got sick, that as we both got older, we really came to understand and appreciate each other. We didn't see each other a lot, as I said, in person, but when we did, it was good. And my love of food definitely comes from my dad, and that's something I continue to sort of experience voraciously, both as a consumer and producer of food. I cook a lot, and I love to eat. My dad was always sort of curious about those things, and I sort of carry that on, thinking of him. But we had quite a good relationship through my late 20s, as he was sort of navigating this life separate from what was our family life for so long. After he and my mom split, we would share recipes, and he would ask me questions about like why I made a certain thing that way. And he really liked this maple scone recipe that I haven't made in years, actually, now that I think of it. It's a maple pecan scone. It's pretty good.
That's delicious.
Yeah. Maple syrup. Yeah, it's great. This is not a cooking podcast, but yeah, we talked a lot about food, and my love of dogs absolutely came from my dad. So I grew up with Labradors, which were his the perfect dog is often what he would say. And I with that partner who I separated from, we also had a dog. We had a house and a dog, and then we were nothing. So I kept the house and the dog, and bought her out, as the lawyers like to say about those things. So we talked about those things a lot. And when he was in the hospital, he and his partner had just gotten a new dog, maybe 2 years before, a Labrador, of course. So I would spend time largely to give his partner a break. I would, take her for a run. The area I grew up in has a lot of reclaimed, we call them dikelands, but there's a fairly substantial system of like water management that sort of took back this section from the water there. So there's these large sort of open spaces that at various points have been for cattle and crops, but it's very easy to go for a moody, windy walk in that part of Nova Scotia. So I did a fair bit of that with his dog at the time. but yeah, like I said, we came to really understand each other and which ways we were similar. Um, in his older life, I think he actually might have come around to teenage me in the way
Yeah.
of his processing. But I still am that way today. So.
Did you guys talk about death at all growing up?
Yes, but no, never. It was not that we didn't talk about it, and uh, but talking about specific people was sometimes a touchy subject. My dad's mom, I never met her. She died of cancer, which is part of why he had his feelings about the Western medicine system.
Mhm.
When he was in his early 20s, I believe. I think it was 2 or 3 years before I was born,
Yeah.
maybe 5. Anyway, um, and he had a, he did not talk about her much, but every now and then he would, and um, he and his father, which is a whole other conversation, had a very strained relationship. Um, I think the apex of summarizing that one actually is that this sort of is it does align with your question a little bit. My dad had a very dry sense of humor and liked to repeat jokes a lot. And one that he loved when I was growing up, we would get the paper, as most homes did at that point, and he would often open up the section that had my dad did crosswords with veracity. But he would open up that section and very jokingly proclaim in some silly accent, he loved to do accents, that he was going to check to see if he was still alive by reading obituaries. It was one of his favorite jokes. He said it all the time. See if I'm still alive. And one morning he read his father's obituary in the obits, and that was actually how he found out that his dad had passed.
Oh, wow.
So like that kind of like human stuff, they had obviously been estranged for a bit and we hadn't
Yeah.
really interacted, but we didn't talk about those kind of relationships often. The fact that death was a normal part of life, we definitely talked about, and you and I talked about this a little bit sort of leading up to scheduling this.
Yeah.
A lot of my first experiences with death and loss were those dogs, and those sorts of things. My dad worked for Natural Resources Nova Scotia, as I mentioned, and those aspects of death. A big part of that job is sort of dealing with whether it be roadkill or people hunting legally or illegally. We also had a wild menagerie of animals come through our house that were found. There was a wildlife rescue, but it was about a 3-hour drive away from our house. So this animal in transit to this wildlife rescue would often spend the night in our house, and how the likelihood of that creature doing well on the other side of that was something we definitely talked about.
Right.
But I have also like delightedly got to pat and comfort a like 4-week-old fawn whose mom was just hit by a car. They make noises like goats, as an aside. Deer like bleat. They're very, very cute creatures. Very soft noses. But so we talked about it very much as the fact that it was like a fact of life, and we are a household that ate animals as part of our eatings, that we talked about that too. But the like loss of family members was not really that grandfather was one that was one of the first ones in my family. I think that would have been, I think I was probably just starting university when that happened.
Mhm.
And both my mom's parents actually passed away during the pandemic, which we also talked about leading up to this. And that is maybe a whole other conversation about the sort of ball of grief and confusion and loss of time that many of us experienced as a result of that time, at least in North America. But
Yeah.
But yeah, we talked about death as a thing that was there and that was always sort of present,
Somewhat removed.
but somewhat removed at a distance at the same time. Yeah.
No wishes. Nobody ever shared any. When I die, I would like this, or I would like to go out like this. Like none of. Did you have any of those moments?
leading
Hypotheticals?
leading up to his hospitalization, no, he was clear in the hospital that he did want to be cremated, which I actually, let's put my mom into this story too, but I remember driving with her while I was there visiting, and I mentioned this. She was like shocked and had a lot of opinions about his choice, and I was like, we're not we're not going to get to this right now. Like, that is quite literally, I had this conversation with him this afternoon. This is what he wants to happen, so like we're gonna do that. And like I'm not really open to having a conversation, especially with all of this like raw feeling about like whether that is a choice that you like. But again, I think when people are faced, especially with very quick declines like this, there's a lot of projecting and rationalization and external processing that is really serving the internal. And it's frustrating to receive as someone who's really close to a thing like that. But you and I also talked about the circles of grief or circles of care, and how the people weaponize that sometimes, unfortunately. Yeah. And in that particular moment, I think I was not my best self as to what that could have been. But I'm a deeply flawed creature, so like that's that is fine.
Complex moments will do that to humans.
Especially like, that one was genuinely surprising to me that she had an opinion on his choice on the matter. I was like, oh, that's funny, but still funny to me today. Clearly remarkable. I just brought it up 9 years later. But and that's not to damn my mom in the situation. I think she was just really sort of thinking out loud about what she thought he would have wanted. They had been separated for 8 years. Yeah, they had been separated for 8 years at that point. It was almost like, without saying it out loud, there was a lot of discussion about like what was okay for her to feel. Like, my parents were married for 20, no, it would have been 36 years.
Significant.
And then separated for 8. Well, divorced for 8, like no longer together. Separated is a transient state, or at least it's used that way. So I had to really convince her to come to the funeral, that was both okay, and that like I thought it was important for her, and my sister and I both wanted her to be there, and she did eventually choose to come. I was very glad for that. She did not go see him in the hospital. We had quite a conversation about that as well. And that, yeah, this whole like what, I think there was fear of optics, like an ex-partner coming. But like my parents grew up on the same street, and like it was one of those situations, and they were together for a very long time, and growing in the same direction of someone as you go through major life changes is arguably one of the most difficult parts of long-term relationships, especially as we become wiser and healthier and learn to process different ways, learn different things about the world. And so supporting my mom's very complex feelings around this was also like it was part of the experience, and at points it was extra frustrating. It arguably was unavoidable at the same time. But I was very glad that she did make the choice to come to the service. And I understand the reasons why she didn't choose to visit him in the hospital. They were very personal to her, so I'm not going to share those, but I do understand that choice. But yeah, it's family is complicated. It always has been, in its own way, for whatever period of time, in its fluidity and in the politics and in the stories and the choices and all of those things. But again, when it comes to like these very rapid declines, which is it's interesting to see like the bits that come out, especially in hindsight.
What did you lean on?
My partner a fair bit. I my dad's partner slash new wife. We were pretty strong mutual support for each other through this. My dad made it very clear that we were the two people he expected to navigate a lot of that. I mentioned like we did like the legal framework stuff in case he was put in a situation where he could no longer make choices. Yeah. I think I said at the very beginning, I continue to be very glad that he ultimately made the choice. That he was kind of done. In this era of MAID and stuff, I'm curious. I feel like that I don't actually know. In 2016 in Nova Scotia, if that was even on the table, I believe it wasn't. But I'm curious if he would have been stuck in a very sort of degraded limbo state, like say the 2 weeks that they told him with the intravenous nutrients. What if that was 2.5 months? Like if it was starting to draw out, I'm curious what conversations would have been like. I guess on the other side of all of this, like I remember telling someone 3 years after the fact that I still thought about my dad every day, and they found that shocking. Like they truly did not believe me.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, not in any like terrible dramatic way, but like I would find myself, and I still do, not admittedly not every day anymore, and that's like a weird other piece of grief, I think. But I would just find myself wondering what he would think about something, and not to like get into politics, but like with the rise of like fascism in the world in the last sort of 6 years, I do continue to wonder like what he would be thinking about it, if we would even agree on some things. And I love that, actually. I don't think it's bad or sad or any of those things. I think it's absolutely a function of the time left problem. My dad did not get to live like a long, beautiful life. I think he had a life that he was pretty happy with. He did a fair bit of adventuring in his 50s and 60s, and a little bit of the 60s he got to experience. But yeah, the person being genuinely shocked that I still thought about my dad all the time was very interesting to me.
Are you a ceremonial person? Do you have any kind of habit, ritual, tradition to remember him, honor him, grieve?
Yes, but maybe not in a super formal way. His birthday's coming up, and I continue to actually find his birthday very difficult, because it's a reminder of that time left problem, as I have sort of taken to calling it in this conversation. But on that day in particular, I tend to make a point of cooking a meal that makes me think of him. Wine is a very big part of my life, which is to say that I like to drink wine, but I also study wine. And in the later part of his life, my dad got into wine-ish, differently than me is what I mean by that ish. But I try and like pick wine on that day that I think he would like. He really liked wine from certain parts of Spain, and there is a particular wine from a small winery in Sonoma County, California, that I introduced him to, that he continued to delight in. So I usually try and get my hands on that. And some years that's all of it. Like that is the full thing. And the 70th was kind of big. Like it or lump it, I think we fixate on milestones, whether they be calendars or nice even numbers of 5 or what have you. But that I definitely do My sister and I always connect on the anniversary of his death. Something as simple as a text message or what. I think she finds that day harder than me, or struggles with it more. Maybe a better way of saying that. I ultimately like that was like a day of relief in so many ways,
Right.
For me. And while it ultimately marks the loss, he was not having a good time.
Yeah.
So, but he is missed, and grief says sneaky shit, and it sneaks up on you in surprising ways. In the beginning, I used to think about it as almost tidal, and that tidal cycle was fast and violent.
Violent.
Yeah. And surprising. But as time passes, I still think it's tidal, but the cycle is different. And it still speeds up and slows down sometimes, but the period of those waves, if you will, spreads out a little bit. I'm sure this is a very shared experience. The fear of not remembering or not being able to remember is truly, it's awful. Like, there are days when I wonder if I would recognize his voice, for example. And I want to believe I would, but it's hard. We attach ourselves to those things. They're such a big part of our life for so long. It's it's
you really, got me with that one.
Sorry. It's a really common one, I think. Yeah. And based on your reaction, maybe you have some similar fears or feelings. I am not worried that I will forget what he looks like. I'm a red, well, as I get older, it's browning and graying, but like I am a red-haired version of him in so many ways. We keep learning that memory is this terribly infallible thing, and that the more we touch memories, the more we change them. And well, that sounds terrible. Maybe it's a beautiful thing in and of itself. I have a very vivid memory of like a long drive from Maine, from Portland, Maine, to Prince Edward Island with my dad. I was at a camp and he came and picked me up. And I think it's a 12 or 13-hour drive. I think I was 15. So like I remember that, but there are things that I don't remember. And I tell myself that I didn't remember them when he was alive either, probably. Mm-hmm. So beating myself up for that it's just the nature of what we hold on to. Yeah, 15 years ago, I never would have thought that 15 years later, I would be talking about my dad's death. I would have been certain that I was making plans to see him this holiday season or this Thanksgiving or something. Right. But that was the time we had. Yeah. And it was a good time.
I have one more question.
Certainly.
Because the kitchen is a magical place, and this is where culture and true family lineage really shines, and it goes understated. You mentioned that it's not a formal thing, but I make a meal, but it's so powerful. So aside of the scones, what is one of the types of meals that you would make?
Oh, that's a great question. Often takes the shape of something. We ate a lot of pasta in my house growing up. I'm very not Italian. We ate a lot of pasta in my house growing up. So it's often something like that. December is his birthday, so it's like we're just sort of accepting that winter sucks here in Eastern Canada in December, let's be honest. So they tend to be like really hearty meals. It's pitch black here right now at like 2 minutes after 5 in the evening. So by the time I'm making dinner, it's dark out, always on his birthday. So it'll be something like that. Some sort of like braised meat I sometimes do. I think I made risotto one year, which I don't know if my dad and I ever had even together, but I got pretty good at making risotto, and I decided that fell into this category of something that I wished I could share with him. And that's sort of its own, like, that's clearly a desire for connection. But that's what that day is, really.
Yeah.
My dad got very good at making, well, in Atlantic Canada, we call fish cakes. So they're sort of like a crab cake. It's like a potato with usually some whitefish, and my dad would often put some salmon and like pan fried. And there's onion and traditionally savory. And if you are from Newfoundland, you are very particular about where that savory comes from. We're not, but so that is a dish that I make often and think of him. My sister asks that I make that when we see each other, usually. So that is, yeah. And I have the recipe. I've turned it into like a recipe I can share, and it is just called Rick's Fish Cakes. And I've sent it to a couple different friends. So
that sounds amazing. Well, here it is. Here's to Rick.
Here's to Rick.
And there it is. To read the poem that Jason read at his father's funeral, stick around till the end of the video if you're on YouTube, or check it out in the show notes. To get in contact with me about death doula services, grief coaching, and vibrational healing, contact deathdoulapastel.com. If you have a story you would like to share, or if you'd like to hear about a specific topic, email me at info@pastelsupernova.com or find me on Instagram at deathdoulapastel. Tell your friends this is an indie podcast, so if you know anyone who would like to listen, please share the information with them, write a review, subscribe, do all the things so that I can keep sharing these beautiful stories with you. Until next time, blessings and respect.